Insights, solutions, and networking all come together at RSA Conference. Join a global cybersecurity community at rsaconference.com/ITSPmag24.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Redefining Society podcast, where we talk about technology and society. And there is, of course, a lot to talk about these days. There's always been a lot to talk about, but now it's out of control. Every day it's 10 years of what would have been technology maybe 50 years ago. I don't know. I'm just making numbers. Don't quote me on that one. But what you can quote me on is that today I have a very, very exciting guest on the show, which if you're watching the video, you already see. Is Leigh Honeywell. How are you doing, Leigh? You can say hello to everybody.
Doing great. Happy to be here. Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me to be on the show. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. And this was to prove to the people listening and not watching that I wasn't pretending to have a guest. So, So today I was saying we're going to talk about, and I've done it a little bit more lately. I kind of fished back in the cybersecurity side of ITSP Magazine as we're getting ready for the season, and we were talking before recording the season of conference of infosecurity and cybersecurity. And of course, on this show, we don't dive deep into the technology of things or the old acronyms in the industry. We try to make it understandable for everybody. And we were thinking about what could be a good topic, and we're probably going to talk something about online harassment and tips and for kids and family and parents and all of that. But we don't have a plan. So based on the conversation we had before hit recording, this is going to be a good one. So I want you guys to stay tuned and pay attention. And to start, we're going to hear from Leigh a little bit about her and why she is an expert in all of this.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. My name is Leigh Honeywell. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tallpoppy. My company does personal and executive cybersecurity for high-profile organizations and individuals. I like to think of what we do as being sort of security outside the firewall, personal cyber, privacy, all of those things that aren't the corporate network, but still have an impact on the security of an organization. I've been doing this for well over a decade, but prior to starting Tallpoppy, I spent a year at the American Civil Liberties Union as a technology fellow. I like to explain that job as I explained computers to lawyers so that we could sue the government over civil liberties issues. But that's actually like a pretty accurate explanation of the job. It was a policy kind of, yeah. It was really neat, getting to work on policy issues around privacy, security, civil liberties. And before that, I had like a relatively standard cybersecurity career working at companies like Slack, Salesforce, Microsoft, and Symantec. The most sort of high-profile role I think I had was at Microsoft. I was on the Patch Tuesday team. So sorry about rebooting your computer a couple of times in the early 2010s. That was we needed to. But I feel like that job is also very easy to explain to non-security people as coordinating the cybersecurity bugs and updates and all of that different moving parts to keep desktop software secure. And so I really have been on that journey from boxed software to the cloud, keeping both of those secure software development processes. And during that time I was living in the States. I'm now back in Canada, Canadian born and raised, but I lived in the States for a decade. And now I'm back in my hometown, Ottawa. John Oliver, the comedian, once called Ottawa the town that fun forgot, but I like to think it's actually pretty fun. So, yeah.
Never been there, but it's Canada is actually on my list of places to go. Both sides, like the Vancouver side and the Ontario. I think I'm gonna fly through Canada on one of my upcoming trip, but I don't.
Amazing!
I'm probably just touching the airport, really.
Yeah. Well, Toronto Airport, they redid it in the early 2000s, and they haven't done much with it since, but it's still pretty. I think I can.
At least they've redone it
good
once.
Restaurants
if
and
you
stuff.
go to LA, they're still redoing it.
The big thing that's changed is there's now a train that goes straight from the Toronto airport to downtown. So even if you have like a 6-hour layover, you can totally like go to the CN Tower. Like it's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool.
You got a bit of time, do a little detour.
On the list of things to do. For
Excellent.
Sure. So looking at your background, we don't go all the way back to just close the office door and the computer is safe, but you've seen a lot of it.
Yeah.
And for people who've been in the industry like this, it's relatively easy to say, okay, we went from A to whatever we are now, maybe R, T, M, whatever the alphabet letter is. But for people that are not in the industry, and especially people that are even the native generation, they don't understand that steps they've been going through from the analog to digital for a lot of things, and to even understanding that we used to open computer and put our hands inside it, and now you can't. Like, our computer in your smartphone, you have no idea how it works.
Oh,
and
man.
Sometimes that may be a big problem, because I think when you don't know how things work, you don't really know how to protect yourself in the case of cybersecurity. You just don't see the problem. Is it just something that I think from psychological perspective, or...
That's such an interesting question. And I feel like there are really real trade-offs there between, the sort of walled garden ecosystem. You think about, I'm holding up my iPhone, and this is like the most secure computing device that consumers have ever been able to get. If you want to hack into somebody's iPhone, it's like $1 million to buy a 0-day vulnerability. Like that is revolutionary compared to the crap that people used to get just from like browsing the internet, right? So there's that security trade-off of the walled garden. But I think that's really real, that like we've lost something of not, get how many times I like cut my fingers like digging around in a computer and getting poked by some little metal pin. Like there's something real about like knowing how the innards are connected together and how the behavior of the computer changes when you upgrade the memory or stuff like that. There's I'll have to send you the link, but there was a dad who let his kids play computer games only sequentially through the history. So he started out on an Atari when the kid was like 3, and then worked through like Game Boy and all the different generations of consoles to see the sort of evolution and, get this kid on board to playing with technology at like a developmentally appropriate way. I just thought that was like a really neat way of sort of exploring the history of technology through games. Yeah,
and it's kind of like what I was thinking. I mean, I played Pong, so that's how old I am.
You got to start with Pong.
but the point is, I love that because it's gonna like see how things got better or more complex, and kind of like understanding it. Also, maybe appreciate how real the video games are now compared with But at the time, a stick was fun.
Still fun.
Right? I still like to play pinball. So, hey, there you go.
Yeah.
So maybe not much about breaking stuff or the right to repair or all that kind of stuff, but the idea of really understanding what could happen to you when you use this device. I feel like, from data sharing and biometrics, and I mean, we can talk about very crazy stuff now with AI, but to bring it down, when you advocate for online harassment and kid safety, and I don't know you to talk to parents or what you do, but where do you even start?
I think the biggest, like, if we look at that again, sort of zooming back out to the history of computing, when I started using technology in the 90s, like, you had to worry about, is this floppy disk going to have a virus on it? And then you get online and it's like, this program that I've downloaded, is it going to infect me? Or am I going to get infected just by clicking on a link and my browser's got a vulnerability in it? And the biggest shift that I've seen in terms of that, like, sort of historical understanding, is that instead of worrying, we still have to worry to a certain degree about our endpoints getting hacked, whether it's mobile or, with stuff like Pegasus, the sort of nation state malware targeting mobile, or on desktop, whether it's Windows with ransomware and all this stuff, or on Macs, tends to be more like crappy browser extensions. What we see today when when I'm working one-on-one with folks, is really a focus on accounts, consumer accounts, online accounts, your Gmail, your Facebook, all of these, it's not about the computer itself getting hacked. It's about somebody reusing passwords or having other poor security practices, or the websites themselves, the online services getting hacked, versus it used to be about the endpoint getting compromised. I think that's the biggest shift conceptually as we think about security, and how that translates if you're a parent, or maybe you're an adult who has a parent who's aging, or another vulnerable adult in your life. How do you keep them safe? It's not just about running antivirus. It hasn't been about running antivirus for a long time, but it's about how are they securing the different pieces of their digital life, their sort of personal digital infrastructure, using things like password managers, two-factor authentication, and good general cyber hygiene, versus just securing that individual computer or phone. So I think that's when I'm talking to individuals about what they can do to protect themselves, it really is that cyber hygiene piece, more so than is their antivirus up to date?
Mm-hmm. So we're kind of to the point where driving a car, which is also a computer on wheel. But it's more I'm not worried about fixing it myself if it breaks, but I do need to worry about respecting the rule of the road, and be alert and be smart. And another parallel there could be in what you said is that you can drive a car that is very safe because it brakes on its own, but you still need to pay attention because someone can still do something.
Other people on the road. I really like that analogy, because I think one of the other pieces around that sort of personal digital hygiene thing is I never want to be don't click on links, be perfect every time, don't make any mistakes. It's much more about how do we put systems in place, how do we use tools in our personal ecosystem that make it impossible to get hacked or significantly harder. And if you're having a bad day and you're really tired, you're not going to accidentally put your password in the wrong place, because you're going to rely on your password manager to only autofill your Google password on google.com, right? You have these tools that protect you from yourself when needed.
Right.
And I always do the little makeup influencer, show off my YubiKey that is attached to my AirPods, so I can find my YubiKey. But I think the YubiKey and U2F keys in general are a really good example where the key cryptographically authenticates to google.com. If I go to evilfakeGoogle.com, key is going to be this isn't the real Google, right? So I'm protected from malicious action, but I'm also protected from human error because the technology is there to support me. Because nobody's perfect. We all have a bad day.
Yeah.
Everybody's susceptible to. Think about the recent ZX bug where this open source maintainer was basically tricked into adding a bad actor to their open source project, who then put a backdoor in a bunch of Linux distributions, right? Everybody has a bad day, and we have to have sort of multiple layers of defense in order to be able to stay safe from really a world that is increasingly connected, and with that comes increased vulnerability.
Yeah, and as much as something gets popular, all of a sudden attract the attention of the bad actors.
Exactly.
And that's just the way it goes. So one thing that I often think about, and I go back again to understanding a little bit of this passage, is when you have, let's say, I'm going to focus on the kid right now.
Yeah, for sure.
I hear a story, I don't have kids, but I hear a story where kids get their smartphone at 3 years old. And I'm like, okay. Seems a little bit, it's here, you want a car? There, take the car. But the problem for me is that oftentimes it comes without education and that safety driver license to be able to drive the car. You don't have a driver license to drive a smartphone.
Yeah.
And either I don't know, I'm trying to come up with metaphor right now. It's all right, you can ride your bike, but only inside the house or inside the garden, but you cannot go outside because it gets dangerous there.
Yeah.
So, do you lock the internet? Do you just give the smartphone that is not really a smartphone, it's more of a dumb phone? I mean, are we just not understanding the power and the responsibility and the risk that come with this as parents or as teacher? Or, I mean, is it a lack of understanding from one generation to another that we haven't really got into safety for smart devices and social media and how to handle that?
I think when I think about when I got online, I was like 12 or 13, right? It was like right when, I know it was when I was 12, because when the COPPA law, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, I think it is, I had to get my mom to send a fax to California to let me keep my GeoCities page because I had signed up when I was less than 13. The funniest part of the story is I would later work at Slack with one of the people who like received those faxes, which is just like the best sort of tech small world story. But 12 is very different developmentally than a 3-year-old getting a smartphone. And I have many friends who have very small kids, and the allure of the shiny object is very, very strong. And I think one of the advisors to my company is an author named Devorah Heitner, who has a couple of books out about keeping kids safe online.
I know her.
And
She's been on my show.
Oh, amazing. Yes. Oh, that's so good to hear. Her work is like so essential in this space. I definitely like anything that I say that's smart about keeping kids safe online almost certainly came from Devorah, but her catchphrase of mentoring over monitoring, I think, is really, really important. Mm-hmm. But to be able to do that mentoring, you have to sort of have good boundaries and good practices yourself around technology, so that in a developmentally appropriate way, as the kid starts using technology, you can be there for them and have that like open door policy, walk them through how to deal with interactions online. And I think, sort of to my perception and from my read of the literature, I feel like the answer isn't just locking things down. There are definitely circumstances where something's gone off the rails, where it does make sense to lock things down. But teaching kids to have healthy boundaries and interactions with technology, like a parent's not always going to be there to be the sort of like eye over the shoulder of the kid. You have to be able to like learn how to have your own boundaries with technology. So, I think that sort of mentoring frame of, how do you want to deal with this? Which applies in so many aspects of life, but I think it really does apply to technology. And, there should be, kids need to have privacy to be able to develop into wholly unique human beings, but there has to also be that sort of ability to talk to your parent about what you've seen, what you've experienced. And if that trust isn't there, kids are going to find a way, whether it's the school library or other non-supervised use of technology. So when it is supervised, you got to be able to have the like open conversations.
Yeah, and I think that's the key again, to reconnect with the real world, right? I mean, even when there wasn't a computer, kids would do something just because they can't do it. Mm-hmm. That's when they're going to do it. Except that, now it's a little bit more, not just like, I don't know, go to the place where you're not supposed to go, which was maybe very risky, but relatively safe compared with the risk that can be right now going online. So let's talk a little bit about harassment and cyberbullying. I had many episodes even years ago talk about this. Yeah. And where I want to go with you is it's technology, cybersecurity, reaching that point where it's really making the difference, even protecting people that don't know much about it, which has always been the cybersecurity goal. At least before, to say like the users shouldn't be worried about it. I am more in between, where I think the users should be worried about it and educate themselves a little bit, and what you just said about the kids, the parents, and everything. But where is technology helping now, because when you hear the news, often is about the bad things that cybersecurity is not able to help with, or that just came through big news, but million didn't. A million of attacks have been blocked. Nobody cares, right? So, where are we going with that?
The old adage of, attackers have to, defenders have to be right millions of times, attackers only have to be right once, kind of thing. I think there is that fundamental asymmetry. And I think with online harassment, it is less asymmetric than thinking about trying to defend a corporate network. Just the surface area of an individual is often a lot smaller than the surface area of like a Fortune 100 organization, right? You maybe, for all that I have 500 accounts in my password manager, that's maybe the high end of it. And most people are going to have you might have a half dozen social media things, and then your utilities and your online banking, and it might end up being 100 accounts. But that's one person that's very lockdownable, I think that's not the technical term.
Lockdownable, I love it. Just made up a word.
So thinking about, what happens when people are dealing with online harassment, there's really a couple of ways that online harassment plays out and sort of escalates. You get nasty messages, you get threats, you get invasions of privacy in terms of what is out there about you on the internet being magnified, and then you get hacking into accounts. So when we think about what those different pieces are, the threats, if they are, real threats or sort of direct, specific, time-bound, there's a couple of things that take something from just a nasty message to oh, you might actually want to go to law enforcement with that, even though law enforcement is not always amazing, often not amazing at dealing with online harassment. That sort of real intense threatening content, the solution, the sort of thing that is recommended is to talk to law enforcement when it is that real threatening, detailed, specific, particularly if it's identifiable. I think that's one of the sort of counterintuitive things. People get really freaked out by anonymous threats, but if somebody's being anonymous when they send you a threat, they at least at some level know that what they're doing is wrong, right? It's the threats that come from someone's real name where that's when your radar should be pinging pretty strongly. So there's the threats piece. And then the other ways that people deal with people experience online harassment in terms of the privacy violations and the hacking stuff, that there's a fair amount of stuff that is within an individual's control in terms of both proactive and reactive mitigations. So privacy wise, think of aggressively Googling yourself, right? If I was mad at Marco, what would I find about you online? And how would I take that out of context, and sort of thinking like an adversary would about what your sort of online presence looks like. And I really want to be clear that it's not about, don't post, right? Don't feed the trolls. I think that's a really negative way of looking at this stuff, but being thoughtful about the stuff that you post online, making sure that it aligns with your values is what you want to represent. And if you posted stupid things 10 years ago, it's okay to just go and delete them, right? That stuff doesn't need to stick around forever. And maybe it's in archive.org or whatever, but you can, hey, I said some dumb things in the past and I've changed my mind. I've grown as a person. People do change. So that's the online footprint piece. And then the sort of account security piece. What can we do as individuals to protect ourselves, even when social media sites or whatever other online services may not have the best security? I'm such a broken record on this one, but password managers are such an essential piece of the personal security infrastructure. The amount of issues that we see that fundamentally just boil down to password reuse, it's hard to overstate how much of an impact that is on individuals' security. So, we have a couple of products we like. We tend to point people at 1Password and Bitwarden, but there's a bunch of good products out there on the market. There's open source stuff that's free that making sure that that's part of your ecosystem, number one thing that's going to prevent somebody sending you nasty messages from escalating to somebody hacking into your stuff.
The other day I was listening to some episode of doxing. I was on NPR. They were talking about, it was related to the war with Israel and the Palestinian. But the point wasn't why that happened. It was what doxing is. And which is, for people that don't know what it is that somebody does something, maybe it's taken with a camera, and the entire online community or a group of it decided to make public your name, your address, your parents, your phone number and everything. And they kind of gang on people. And I'd like to know your opinion on something like that. And is that consider harassment, or is that consider something completely different? And again, it seems to me it's inevitable when everything is out there on social media. I don't even know where to go. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, the doxing thing is really tricky, because I think there's the fundamentally, especially in the US, but in some other countries have this sort of public data problem as well, but it is certainly worst in the US. There is a whole ecosystem of companies that just buy and sell, databases from the DMV or from the credit bureaus or all these different sources of information that have your entire address history, who you've lived with, which usually includes your parents at some point, right? So that sort of, if you become the person that the internet is mad at, all of a sudden, your parents are getting crank calls, your parents are having their accounts hacked into, it can really increase the bubble of vulnerability when one individual is targeted to where it's so easy to identify who the people in their life are. And trying to get your information taken down from all of these different data broker websites and sort of public information websites is really, it's super tedious. There's a bunch of automated services that'll do some of the takedowns, but your data is still going to be out there. And when we work with executives, when we work with high profile folks, we've developed a bunch of expertise around taking that data down. But there are some types of data that are fundamentally just always going to be public, depending on the jurisdiction. This can include stuff like political donations, which, to a certain degree should be public, but maybe it doesn't need to include your home address. And the home address stuff, I think, is where it makes people feel really, really vulnerable. And, you asked about the sort of doxing, does it constitute harassment? In many cases, it absolutely does. I think there's some interesting wrinkles around if you're a neo-Nazi or somebody who's operating under a pseudonym in their online presence, and somebody figures out that your real name is XYZ and connects it to your neo-Nazi pseudonym, maybe that's just investigative journalism. But where the line is between investigative journalism and non-consensual doxing that constitutes harassment, there's stuff that is very clearly on either side of the line. And sometimes the devil's in the details between those two. But certainly if you're just a random high school teacher who posts on TikTok about LGBTQ issues, and you get featured by a hate account being this teacher is grooming your children, right? That is to me, that feels very clearly it's harassment. So yeah. And then the sort of question as a follow-up is what do you do about it? And I feel it really comes back to those basic personal cyber hygiene practices, understanding what is out there about you on the internet, getting into that sort of adversarial mindset. If I was mad at Marco, what would I find? And having that good personal cyber hygiene so that even if the haters are yelling at you, they're not going to break into your accounts because you've got good security practices.
I guess it all comes down to that, right? I mean, security practices and kind of pass them down to the next generation. Yeah. But again, I go back to, I think the internet skipped a couple of generations.
I think so. Anytime I try to understand TikTok or whatever.
Somebody got into that and they did all the steps, and some other just went from no computer to a smartphone, and and everything.
Though
I'm reconnecting
I hear the candy
to the
bar
beginning.
phones.
Yeah.
I hear that the teens are really into the candy bar phones, like the not smartphones, and they want to just like text each other. I'm actually like very in favor of this. Like
I saw an
get rid of our
article the other day
smartphones.
about that. I think when I'm gonna go visit my family, my parents in Italy, I still have all
Your old
my
Nokias. Oh, I love it. I love it.
and StarTalk and all of
Yep,
that. And maybe worth
absolutely.
something nowadays.
My most
yeah.
controversial tech opinion, I will say, is that Windows Phone was actually really good. I really loved Windows
that's
Phone.
because you work for Microsoft.
I did at the time, but I kept using it even when I left.
Really?
But then I had to get an iPhone for work. But I really liked the big yellow Nokia Windows
There's
phones.
probably people right now that are saying, "Wait, Windows had a phone?"
I know, like 3% market share. Oh yeah.
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Oh man.
No,
Yeah.
there is a tendency to go back, and I love, if you haven't figured out how to connect the vintage and the analog technology to the new one, because there's always something to learn about it from it.
Absolutely.
I mean, you mentioned fax before, but it's kind of like I just see cultures and certain generation to kind of repeat, maybe in a different way, but certain either mistakes, or there's certain waves that come and go back, and it's kind of like the 80s are coming back, then the 60s are coming back, and vintage modern and mid-century furniture. I don't know. It's from a sociological perspective, it's really, really interesting to see all of this. So I'm not surprised that we're going to go. I'm tempted to get
And I think there's a version of that with cybersecurity too, where we think about cybersecurity as a very young profession. But if you look at stuff like the history of financial crimes and fraud, and then you look at how in the past like 10, 15 years, the blockchain, cryptocurrency, there's almost this like replay attack of all of the different kinds of financial fraud, except that now they're on the blockchain. And so people are having to like rediscover how to deal with specific types of fraud in this new technical field. And then I suspect, and I think we're starting to see the early days of it with generative AI. And now that AI is like really hitting the mainstream in a way that it hasn't in previous iterations of what people called AI, we're going to start to see that same, what is the history of hacking and different crimes and fraud, and how are people using these new technologies to do old kinds of crime, but in a new way. And I think there's a cyclicality to it that I find really, really interesting.
Yep, absolutely. And it comes down to social engineering, right? I mean,
a lot of it, yeah.
It goes to the Spanish prisoner, and then became the Nigerian prince. But that thing worked in the 1800s.
Absolutely. My grandparents would get postal letters with the same script as you now see in your email spam box.
Yep. Yeah. And it goes back to, you can lock your house as much as you want, but then you put the keys under the mat. It's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
All right. So this is fun, and I knew it was going to be hard to contain on something specific because it's really exciting, and they just little spark flame in my head, and I'm like, I'm going to ask her about this and that, but we'll call it off for here now. Maybe with maybe with one advice for the young kids that could be very useful. I know there could probably a long list. Devorah had it. Many. I talked to other people. They also it's a tough generation when you're dealing with all of this. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I would have want to have a childhood or being a teenager with all of these, or if it was just better to kick the ball around and play soccer and go on a bike all day.
I was very bad at soccer.
And you break a knee or scrap yourself, but at least I didn't have to worry about personal data, and doxing.
I think the biggest thing when I think about both adults and kids, but especially kids, is that when you if you're interacting with technology and it's making you feel bad, talk to somebody about it. Whether it's like, I don't know if this is the right thing, or this person has sent me something that makes me feel bad, or I'm not sure what to do here, or I'm confused. Like, talk to somebody, whether it's a peer, a parent, somebody in your school, like that like noticing that this is a bad experience, talking to somebody about it.
I like it.
Nobody emerges from the womb knowing how to use computers. Like, we gotta figure it all out together. So
and that applies to everything else.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so the line that divide the digital life and the real life, it's really not there anymore.
Everything is, there's no IRL versus online. It's all just life. Yeah.
It all just life. And so something to think about for everybody listening. And if you want to have more information, you have some questions, just post a comment if you're looking at this on social media. And let me know. I'll be happy to have Leigh back and talk more about these things. And in the meantime, I'm looking forward to running into you in some of the conference.
Absolutely, conference season. Yeah.
All right, Leigh, thank you so much. They'll be on the notes, all the links for people to get in touch with you, and again, subscribe, stay tuned, and we'll come up with more. So thank you again, Leigh.
Sweet. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Insights, solutions, and networking all come together at RSA Conference. Join a global cybersecurity community at rsaconference.com/ITSPmag24.